Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Fraud Boxer podcast. This one is part 2 of 2, and I've got Dajana back again. And actually, this is one that we are actually recording on a separate day from the first one. Normally on 2-part series, you record the episodes all in one sitting, you split it into 2 and go. But this one, we actually are doing a real deal, having a whole other session for this. So thank you once again for actually giving up more of your time on a whole different day. How are you doing today?
I am doing very well. Thank you very much. And thank you for having me back. And this time I'm not dressed up. I don't have makeup on, so I don't look as good as I did first time. Not that they can see me, but still.
That's really interesting because this was going to be the very first video one that we posted. So,
oh, wow. Now, great. This is real deal for sure. Dajana in real time, robe, pajama.
So how was your weekend? Did you have a good weekend? You know, anything crazy, anything that we can tell the audience that might have been fun?
It was actually interesting weekend, so many Halloween parties and going to places. I actually went to a wine bar that had blues band playing.
Oh.
It was probably the best live music I ever heard in my life.
Really?
Yeah.
Did you get the name of the band? Are they a local band? Are they a touring band?
I think they're a local band called Mojo Blues Cats, something like that.
It's a very blues band name right there.
it was amazing. Definitely amazing. And actually interesting that we started talking about that because you were just telling me you were having your guitar lesson.
Yeah.
So I really want to know more about that.
Yeah. So I guess this is kind of going to be an episode where you kind of talk about me and this is what we're going to call a reverse interview, right? So you're going to be asking me questions, and we'll eventually get to how I got in this industry. But yes, I do play guitar. I take guitar lessons religiously. I do twice a week. I do Tuesdays and Fridays. I meet with my guitar teacher, and then I try is the key word to maintain a pretty decent practice schedule. Life gets in the way. We do have a podcast. I do have a day job. I am a social person, so things get in the way. But I'm trying to work up. There's a thing that people do in Nashville. If anybody's ever been there, a lot of the singer-songwriters, if you go up like on some of the upper floors, there usually will be 2 songwriters up there, and then they kind of one plays one song, one plays another song. A lot of times it's covers, but if you tip them well, they'll play some of their original songs. So I'm trying to work up to a spot where I'm able to play for a few hours at a time. Just a song. So I do a lot of practice in the backyard. Unfortunately, when I do get the courage up to go and play in front of people in my backyard, I've had a couple of cocktails, so it's not my best work. But we're getting better. I've been doing it. It's kind of my pandemic thing. I played a little bit lightly before, like power chord stuff and all that. But this is one, like, since the pandemic, we were all trapped inside. I started taking lessons and just keep going. I wanted to learn the theory, learn the reasons why behind like certain chord progressions, why ones work, ones don't, major, minor chords, the scales, those sorts of things.
There's that fraud mind getting into your guitar learning.
Probably.
Like
what is the underlying reason?
But it doesn't work. What is the reason? What type of music do you play?
So right now I'm focusing a lot on Americana. So songwriters like Zach Bryan, Cody Jinks stuff, Charles Wesley Godwin. These are probably names that a lot of other people know. I know Zach Bryan got really popular in the last year. I've been a fan of his for a number of years. Actually flew to Nashville earlier this year to go see him play the Ryman right before he really exploded. So now he's never going to play a venue like that again. I do play like some punk rock stuff, like my buddies. I'm pretty good friends with the guys that are in a punk band called Cigar. They were pretty popular in the 90s. They just put out a new record recently. It's an excellent record, so I've been trying to play that. However, they play really, really, really fast, so it's hard. So I actually slow it down to like 75% when I play along. I pretty much stick to those. I don't play anything like any crazy metal stuff. I know like Alexander Hall, he plays guitar too, and he's a metalhead. So we're trying to get the MRC band together. I actually pinged Julie together and asked for 30 minutes at the upcoming MRC to see if we could all play together. So
that would definitely be the most visited session.
That would be fun, right? She said maybe before the welcome thing, maybe we get up on stage at the happy hour in the conference center, like the actual thing. We'll see what happens there.
I think there's a time, there's a place, there's an opportunity. I definitely think you guys should play it. And it seems to me that a lot of fraud fighters do have this creative side. So is that the only creative side you have, or do you do anything else?
I used to write. I was a writer. I was a blogger, that sort of thing. Not like a blogger that was like a political blogger or anything like that. More just I would write to write. The blogs no longer exist, but it was fun. When I originally was going to college, I wanted to be a writer. So I thought like it was it was a lot of fun. Creative writing, specifically telling stories, telling grandiose stories. I mean, believe it or not, that's why I have this personality that everything's just larger than life. I would tell stories that same way, very descriptive. I try to get the writer or the reader to feel. That was something that unfortunately life got in the way, because writing, unless you're writing books and novels, is not going to really pay the bills. And I didn't really have the energy at the time to write a full novel. So the blogging was kind of fun. And I did have a pretty good readership on that, several thousand, when I did have them posted.
Oh,
Um, but that was a lot easier back in the MySpace days and those sorts of things, where it was you could get a little wider audience. Now I'm a little more of a private person as far as like those pieces of my life goes. Like my industry persona is different than my personal persona. So
I think that's always the case for all of
yeah,
us.
yeah.
So soon enough, we can expect a nice song about giraffe.
Yeah, maybe about
I mean, let's
giraffes.
combine all of your
So
passions
yeah,
together.
so I have a
And you're
couple
going
of
to
songs.
perform at
Yeah,
MRC.
I will. I'll have the tall neck song will be coming up here, But I do have a couple of songs that I'm working on recording right now. I was doing some recording a few weeks back, and one of my guitars, my Taylor, was having some string buzz after some adjustments I did, so it had to go into the shop. But it's back now, so some recordings will be coming along. Especially with all this pro audio equipment that I got for this podcast. Might as well make use of it in other ways as well.
Absolutely. Why not? That's repurposing existing resources, isn't it? That's something that fraud fighters have in common
Yeah.
with you, obviously.
That's a good point. Like a lot of times, I can't get development resources to work on the project, so I try to find clever ways to make the things work. And I do the same thing with budget. Like when I was at my last company, obviously COVID restrictions had a lot to say about how much money I could spend, but I was having like laptops and stuff go down, and I needed to get staff new laptops, but I didn't have budget to get them. So I was getting creative. Like I was sending out my backup laptop to people until we could get resources. Always finding creative ways, to get different information, finding if I can pull it from different databases that might already exist versus doing a whole new API ingestion, or whatever.
I think that's one thing I always kind of talk about. Besides, of course, cross-department collaboration, to reach out to those other departments and check what reports they already have, what processes they already have. So instead of reinventing a wheel, just check what other reports they have. You can kind of repurpose and use for whatever you need to do. I know that our customer service department is receiving regular reports on refunds and refunds that are processed and completed. I actually just got into that report and use it for my refund fraud. Same information,
What a
same
small
data.
world. So you and I did that KPI webinar, I think a few months back. We were talking kind of about
June month, something.
Yeah, how we were different KPI things that we measure, and we were talking about different, like all sorts of different things. And I think the refunds part is something that's really interesting as well. At this company, I joined. It's coming up on my 1 year mark, but it took a while to really get acclimated and get my lay of the land here. I think one of the things that I have when I ask for things, it's usually somebody else has a report. So we use Tableau here for our internal reporting. And with Steve on my team specifically, I'm like, hey, do we have a refund report? Are we tracking those? And he's like, actually, yeah, here we are,
Yes.
Or do we have a customer service contacts, or all these little things that I've asked so far? Somebody at some place has made it. And I'm fortunate that this company doesn't lock the tableaus down to like individual departments or individual people, so I can actually access them. Other places I've had a little more trouble getting to those reports. So that way I don't have to use BI to build me out new reports. I usually just have access to the information I need.
Yeah, I always said 9 times out of 10 report already exists. It's probably not used, obviously not used for what you are going to use it, but the data exists, report exists. Just reach out to the right people. And I have Steve too. I mean, it's not Steve, her name is Erin, and she's been with my company for so long and knows the company inside out, knows everyone and every program we use, every software you use. So every time I need something, she can get it within a few minutes. It's so amazing. It's great to have people like
yeah. I've been fortunate. I've just, as you were saying that, I was thinking back to like my last few companies. I've always had like that one person that's been there for a really long time. That's like my right hand, my go-to, that helps me like actually navigate. And as one of the guys here at this company told me, like makes my world a lot smaller here, which is super helpful to have. So yeah, find your person at your company, everybody. Find your person that makes your world smaller and teaches you where to go and how to find everything. So yeah.
Yes, and reports do exist. Just find them.
Yes, they do.
So talking about small world, we always talk about how our fraud world is very small and how I think I probably know 90% of fraud fighters in the world at this point. How did you get into this world and how long actually you've been in fraud fighting industry?
Yeah. So I think I started kind of probably late 2010 was when I kind of fell into the fraud fighting world, as much of us do. I had a whole life before this, several lives, it seems like, before I ever got into fraud. And it was kind of a weird opportunity. So before this, I actually started my life as a men's buyer for a chain of retail stores. And I think I talked about that on another episode. So for a number of years, I was buying what would be considered like surf, skate, and motocross apparel. So like Fox, Volcom, those sorts of things. So I was a buyer for a chain of retail stores, specifically picking out the men's lines and the high dollar, high volume lines. So the ones that we had the most sales on in our stores. And I was doing that for a long time and I really, really enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun. The pay wasn't super great at the time for me, but I was doing this up in Oregon and I wasn't always really excited about living in Oregon. So I had been wanting to probably move on to what people would call greener pastures down in California. So I was looking around at the same time, kind of talking to some of those companies about opportunities that they might have down here to be like an inside sales rep, which were like a lot of times the people that I would deal with at those companies. But it just so happened, as fate would have it, like I ended up dating somebody who had a place in Oregon and a place down here with her family. And that family had an opportunity for me to work at their software company that they had owned and kind of working on special projects like doing video editing, just little projects that they would have. The father was very entrepreneurial. I mean, it was his company that he had founded. It was like his third one, and they were all very successful. So he kind of like took me under his wing and helped me develop my ideas into real things. So I was helping with special projects. I moved down here, ended up starting my own skateboard company. It was called Ravage Skateboards at the time, and we had a pretty good run for a really long time selling skateboards. I was using my connections and my leverage from the industry that I was in previously as a buyer to have my skateboards manufactured at a very large facility. It was a company called Dwindle Distribution that they were owned by Globe Shoes, actually down here in El Segundo. And they were making my skateboards at their factory with my logos. I was doing heat transfer logos on there. I was paying artists, hiring artists to make me logos. I was doing all the graphics artists for like cards and things to like hand out, running competitions. I was running the actual team. And I was doing guerrilla marketing for getting my items into the stores. So how it would kind of work is one of the special projects that I worked on was my girlfriend at the time was a singer, and she was on a major label actually, and the label, it was right at the weird time in the music industry where like not a lot of sales were happening, so the labels weren't investing a ton of money in their marketing pushes for their new unproven artists. So the label had kind of worked with us a little bit to help use MySpace as a marketing platform for them. So
MySpace again?
yeah, so the her father had the company was they were all tech companies, so he had built a script that we were able to use against MySpace using the data that we had pulled from MySpace. MySpace allowed us to crawl there. Well, they didn't knowingly allow us to crawl it, but their robots.txt said we could. So we pulled back all of the demographic data for about the first 150 million profiles, and then we used that to advertise her accordingly. So by city, by age, by other likes, and all of that. And we were able to successfully move her career along forward. However, after that we stopped doing that project with the label when she got big enough, I then took that same information and applied it to my skateboard company. So what I would do is I would visit a skate shop and I would talk to the owner of that shop and say, "Hey, would you put my boards up here?" And usually they'd say no because they'd never heard of me before, clearly. And I would then go onto MySpace and I'd pull down their friends list, and then I would add everybody on that friends list. And then I would, if they accepted, if they chose to, I would then drop a digital version of my sales flyer on their page, like on their comments, and say ask for it at, and then whatever that local shop was. And it would usually create enough buzz that that person would call me and I put my boards in. Now, granted, this is going to be a long story. Buckle in, everybody. This is a Jordan episode, but
this is all about Jordan.
It really is. But using my knowledge from the industry, I was very conscious about the pricing that I had on my skateboard. So skateboards usually costed at the time about $50 to $60, depending on the brand that you were buying. And usually the store would buy those skateboards for $36. So the the margin on those boards was razor thin. And if you put them in like some sort of package, then you'd usually discount the boards down to like $40. So your $4 profit plus the shipping that you had to have to get it to you usually was never going to make enough money. So I was able to manufacture my boards at a price point that I was able to sell them to the stores for $25 that they could then sell at an MSRP of $50. So they could get a full 50% margin. And I myself, at the price point that I was manufacturing them, was making them an over a 50% margin. So I was able to
Nice.
get a pretty good like end-to-end sales thing going as far as profitability goes. But what happened at the end of it all is we were moving some boards. We were moving several thousand boards at the time. I really liked the team. I really liked the name. I really liked my art. I loved what we were doing. It was taking a lot of hours, but it was one of those things that like it was more fun than it was work, you know. So I was
If you
proud of the
enjoy
work that we
doing
were
it,
doing.
yes.
Yeah. But unfortunately, the economy died at that time because that was about 2009. So we started dying in 8. But in 2009, people stopped buying luxury items. So not a lot of skateboards, especially skateboards from companies that they didn't really know that well. So kind of had to pivot. And then I had pivoted into doing call center work because that I needed I needed healthcare because I have a couple of medical conditions. I have ulcerative colitis is one of them, and I also have a liver issue, but that's being sorted out by UCLA. I think we have a wrong diagnosis on my initial one, so I'm gonna live forever, everybody. But
Lucky
the
you.
yeah, right. But one of those call centers, well, there was T-Mobile, there was Apple, and then there was Netflix that I worked at, and this was probably late 2010, early 2011, and I was doing regular customer service calls, billing calls, all those things, and it was right when instant watching, what we used to call it at the time, was becoming popular. So a lot of learning curve for people that weren't used to streaming content online. Using things like Nintendo Wii's, using old Blu-ray players that they used to have, and the TVs hadn't really had it built in yet. Roku was just starting, so a lot of people were calling in for technical issues, trying to figure out how to do it. But one of the days, in my 130 calls I would take in a shift, one of those days, about every other call was somebody saying, "What is Netflix? I've never heard of it. I have it on my credit card statement." I put in their information, and up would pop the same single account every single time. Hogar
Wow.
Duncan. I'll never forget that guy, Hogar Duncan. But as we kept going through this, I was fortunate that the call center that I was working at actually had the research department in the back. So I was able to go back to the research department and sit down with some of the people that I knew in that department. And we started looking at these accounts, and we discovered that what was happening is that we had just switched to a $0 authorization. And there was no CAPTCHA and no barrier of entry. So what had happened is somebody had grabbed a list of credit cards, thousands and thousands, thousands of them, and was hitting this list against our $0 authorization to test the cards to see what was happening. Yeah, were they good? Were they bad? And since they could just hit us again and again and again when there was no barrier of entry like there is on a lot of other
Yeah.
sites at the time, I mean, I'm sure that's a lot has changed since then. You know, this was very early in this world.
Yeah.
Um, we were able to determine and figure out and stop that from happening. And that was something that was like my first dip my toe into what this world is. Yeah.
I was just about to ask, was this your first official fraud case? The
It
one
really
you
was.
solved?
It really was. That was
And the rest
how
is history, huh?
yeah. So then I came. I actually wanted to move back to LA. I came back to LA. I told that same story in an interview for a customer service job at Fandango. They said they had literally the same problem happening, and
Oh, wow.
I was like, well, let me do what I did, and I did, and now the rest is history.
So if I would ask you what is your most interesting fraud case, would that be the one? Or do you have
No.
anything else that you want to share that is like
Oh
super fun
no,
and
no,
interesting?
no. I have one that I can talk about because it was on the news. But I was at Fandango years and years and years ago, and there I was worked pretty closely with Dan from AMC Theaters. He's still a friend of mine. I just saw him in Nashville when I was there in February. Had lunch with him. He's a great dude. And AMC Theaters is a great company. I can't say enough great things about the people and the staff over there. So I want to get that out of the way. But they were having an unfortunate problem way back, I think in probably 2014, maybe even 2013, where they had a young man who was taking plastic water bottles and filling them with a acid-like substance, and during large movie premieres would toss it into the front. And this was shortly after the
Oh,
Colorado
wow.
Aurora, Colorado shooting, so people were hypersensitive about being in movie theaters. So he would throw this and it would explode, pop, and gas. You know, one person got some spilled on them and caused some skin irritations. But he was doing this again and again and again. And um, so AMC was kind of at a loss about what to do because they didn't have really any data, like you don't have a whole lot of data about who, the what, the why. Uh, so they sent over, so Dan called me and was like, could you possibly help us? And then he told me some of the theaters that it was happening at. And I ran some queries on our database and was able to locate a single account that had made purchases at, I believe it was 8 out of 7. So he sent me a list of 7 and I was like, are you sure it's 7? And he's like, okay, there is one more that we haven't talked about. And it wasn't just AMC, it was other theaters that he was doing this at too. It was some Cinemark stuff as well. And I was able to have him engage law enforcement with me at that point. I said, there's actually the Secret Service was involved in that particular one. And
Oh, wow.
yeah, because it was domestic terrorism.
Yeah.
So in theory, so they were able to subpoena me. It was like in the middle of the night when they finally got the subpoena and the judge came through on it. And I was able to give them the information, and it actually resulted in an arrest. So if you look at
Oh,
Bottle
wow.
Bombers, AMC theaters on your Google, you will find, kind of read through the story. The young man, they made an example of him, and they arrested him, and he will spend, I believe, the next like 20 something years in jail.
Oh, wow.
So that was the one like where it all happened like really fast. Like it was, I ran a good query. Now my first try, I was able to locate the individual, and we did it all by the book. We went through the correct legal channels, and I would say within 24 hours of me getting the phone call to he was in handcuffs.
Oh,
So
wow.
yeah,
Amazing.
and then wouldn't you know it, the bottle bombing stopped, so I got the right guy.
You did get the right guy, obviously. It is so interesting. I mean, in this world, how often we actually do get to cross into not just digital space, but like a brick and mortar space, especially
Yeah,
in my job. We do work a lot with the store LP and kind of connect the dots, and not maybe making arrest in our case, but
yeah.
definitely to catch some of these fraudsters, some of the abusers. One of the cases I actually worked on, I think, I'm not sure if I shared it ever before in any of the webinars or podcasts, but it was funny that somebody in the company where I worked committed a crime of return fraud, like, made a return to their credit card. But the system was set up in a way that you could actually pick any employee name as when you're completing the return. Like, you should pick your name that you are completing this return or refund, but you could pick any.
So you
And this,
like, this is like the person that's logged in. So what's
yeah,
meant to audit who's actually processing the return, you could put it under somebody else.
correct. So you go in, you get the phone call, customer says, I didn't get it, whatever. It was 10, 15 years ago. And you would create the refund request, you would complete the refund, but you could put any credit card in there without any restrictions. As we know right now, you can only return to the original payment form of payment. And you could not only pick whatever credit card and enter the credit card number, you could actually pick any name off of the employee list and say that this person actually completed refund. So there was a person who was continuously doing these refunds to her credit card, but was
Putting everybody
unfortunate
else.
enough to put my name in there.
Oh, so you got hauled your ass in.
It was
Yeah.
interesting, but what was really interesting that she didn't know who I am. She didn't know I was the one that gets these cases to investigate them. And I wasn't actually processing any returns or refunds or anything. It wasn't what I did. So I wouldn't even know how to process it at the time. So I started getting these cases. I'm like, actually, one of my friends started getting them first. She was like, were you here last Saturday? I'm like, no, I was with my children. My children were very little at the time. She said, well, there are several refunds completed with your name, but they went to a different credit card other than customer's credit card. It was, yeah, I think it was for Hugo Boss, about $2,000 refunds at that point. So, yeah, this person was unfortunate enough to do it with my name, which probably if it was someone else's name, we could have even accused them incorrectly, because we wouldn't have way of knowing that that person didn't really complete the refund. So when we started researching a little bit more, calling the banks on the credit cards to see who the credit card matches to, we actually had the list of employees who were working that day. We took their names and addresses, and then we called the bank for address verification and matched to the address of the person who actually did process the refund.
Interesting.
You know how we used to do AVS match? We
Yeah.
would call and you would type in a number or just read the number to the bank on the phone. So we took all of the employees that worked that day, we took their home addresses, and we were reading, trying to match what address is matching that credit card.
And they
We did
actually told you
several
that?
phone calls.
The bank actually told you that?
No, that's a merchant. That's how it used to be.
Oh, you did a merchant. You'll use the
You do
merchant
the
service.
merchant. Yeah, you
Yeah.
use
So
the
you weren't
merchant
just
service to.
calling like Bank of America and saying, "Hey,
Yeah,
does
yeah, yeah. No,
John Smith live at this?"
we used to do this as a
Yeah.
part of our
That's what
job
you
called
like on the
merchant
last
services.
episode. Yeah, that you were
Yeah,
talking about. Yeah.
but this was actually a different company. It was company a few years after that. But that service still existed. At that point, we already had AVS and everything, but we remembered that you could do this over the phone. So we took all available addresses for our employees that were working that Saturday. We called the bank, like several different calls, several different AVS attempts, and we finally matched the number to the credit card. And we knew who was actually there. We knew who did it. So I actually ended up in court as a witness. And one of the people there asked me, "Oh, why should we believe that it isn't you who did this?" I'm like, first of all, I wasn't there. Second, I have proof where I was that day at that time. And third, I spend more than 40 hours a week on average trying to stop people from doing this. Why would I compromise myself over $1,200 or $2,000? So it was interesting that this person did actually end up in jail, but for many other things she had done.
Yeah.
But yeah,
I have one more because I think people are
good,
always
sure.
a sucker for a good like fraud story that
I think they
isn't
want
even
to hear.
necessarily fraud, you know. But like there was another one. It was again when I was back in my Fandango days. I was a little more involved with law enforcement back then. But we had somebody that was doing just a regular triangulation scheme, but it was a little bit different in the fact that it was like an in-person one. So they were using stolen credit cards to buy the inventory and then standing outside of the movie theaters to actually physically sell the tickets cash to another person and to like an unsuspecting person, and that person would scan. And at that point, like at Fandango, we didn't really cancel the tickets at the time. You know, it's a different type of business than it is with like with larger tickets. But this particular guy, he was doing it in the Chicago area. There was three specific theaters that he would always target. So I would just look for it. He'd use his own name, and I would just like look for it, you know, and see that he was. He's probably using his own name because he probably would have to show that he was the owner of these tickets when he was probably standing outside. I don't know what he was doing it, but anyways, he was doing it, and we actually got him arrested one night. And I was again, I think Dan was helping me out with that one. I think he was boots on the ground there because he lived there at the time. But that guy got out of jail and like started doing it again the next night. Like he didn't
Didn't
even
learn the
stop.
lesson,
Yeah,
obviously.
not at all. And he was just right back out there. And it's just another one of those like just laugh. I think that it's interesting these stories. Like we tell these stories and it has to do with what we do, but it doesn't at the
Yeah.
same time. You know, it's not like what our normal thing is, but these are like the ones that stick out. I know like Tim Russo has always like told some really interesting like in-person stories. So if you ever see him at a conference, anybody grab him and ask him about some of the old stories that he has about catching fraudsters. They're very interesting.
I think catching fraudsters or these fraud cases in the past were much more interesting, I have to say. Right now, they seem to be much more automated, and maybe a
Yeah,
person is removed because they're using all these
they're
software and
using
everything to
technology
kind of,
against
yeah,
us now. Yeah, it's not
Well,
as just one guy in a room
but
anymore. You know.
but it definitely in the past it was much more interesting, I have to say. I know that I once talked to one of the Ghanaian prince. Is that how you say it? You know, one of those princes from Ghana who are sending me a lot of money. As a part of my job, I actually called and I gave my cell phone and I pretended to be a person that will work with them and reship stuff to their house. So it was really interesting to work with them, and it was really interesting working with law enforcement to provide this information and kind of pretend to be someone that I was not. So I guess I was
That's
committing
funny.
fraud at the
Yeah, well,
point.
you know, we gotta
But
do what
yeah,
we have to do, right?
yeah, and it's there are tons of stories, and I'm sure that you have hundreds of stories too. So is this what you most like about the industry, or is there something else?
I don't
Or what
know.
else?
I don't know what it is I like about this industry specifically. It's just I really enjoy, I think, the investigative aspect of our jobs entirely. Now, granted, like the last few years, it hasn't been so much of me doing the investigations. I'm a little more hands off on that. My staff is the one that's moving up into doing more the hands-on writing the rules, those sorts of things, and I take a more of an administrative position and a more strategy position, looking at our 5-10 year, how we want to run the software, what software we're going to use, working with our vendors a lot more, which I of course I love, what most people call bullshitting. I enjoy it very much, but it's I think overall the industry just watching it change, watching it grow, but still having all of this investigation and learning the new things. I really love to watch and learn the new things that people are up to. And I don't know, like, I mean, I spent some time when I was in the fashion industry. Clearly, I went to conferences, I did those sorts of things. Even when I was at the software company for a little while, I still would go to like some of the Microsoft conferences. But and they all have parties, they all have happy hours, they all do those sorts of things. But I think at our fraud industry, especially with how it started, and I was here towards the more relative beginning of it at scale. It's a lot more personal to me, so it feels like something that I really am an actual part of, and that's why I think I like to be involved in it quite a bit. But it's just it's whatever it is about this industry, and I don't know if I can always necessarily place my finger on it, but it touches me in all the places that I like to be touched. It's really something that I enjoy doing, and it's I could go out and have cocktails even on a non-work thing and just talk about fraud all night, talk about the different schemes, much like we're doing right now, just having a conversation. Like we came into this particular episode right here with a very loose framework, and we're just kind of free flowing right now and just letting it go. And I think that it's things that we both like, and we can just talk about because of whatever it is about this industry, whatever it might be.
I think it's dynamic of the industry that I enjoy the most, and I think that's probably what most of the people that do it, we all have similar personalities. It's how fast it changes, like you said, and I also think how fast you can see the results of your work.
That's true. It is very satisfying.
Yes, it's very satisfying, because I used to work for banking industry and I was in fraud, but things there take forever. And I think we talked about this before. So it is very satisfying to see all these results and see the kind of a result of all of your work.
If you deploy a rule, you can see the very next attempt, and it's super satisfying when like you're like, got him, and then of course he's going to try and change, but it's also super alarming when you mess up an if or an and statement, and then next thing you know, you blocked all iPhone traffic for an hour.
I've done that.
I've done that.
I blocked Yahoo population from using the site once.
Yeah, it's probably better for them at the end of the day.
It was quite some time ago, so I think Yahoo was still very popular and a lot of people were using that email. But instead of blocking one particular email, I made a mistake and blocked the domain. So it was one of those moments that like a day later, I'm driving somewhere and it just pops in my head, like, what have I done? So I went back to work and fixed it. But it wasn't a lot of people that were impacted, maybe 70, but it was a small company. So in 70
so that's
customers
a lot at the time there.
It was like 50% of their workload.
Oh, wow.
It was quite interesting. But yes, we've done that. So I know that we talked about if you didn't do fraud, what else you would do. But is there any side of fraud industry that you haven't worked in and you would like to kind of explore more into that? Not just fraud, but financial crime overall.
Yeah.
Cyber crime.
That's an excellent question. Good job on that one.
You see, I wasn't on the list.
I have been doing a lot of payments lately, and a lot more payments than I've done. And I did a lot of payments in the past. Like I've always been involved in the payments at my companies and some of the bigger companies to a pretty high level. I didn't actually even realize how high of a level until I started going to payments specific conferences versus just fraud conferences. But I'm really enjoying as I've get really into the weeds on payments. So right now, obviously at my company, we are a very international presence. Like we don't do very much business in the US. Most of our business is international. So doing a lot of work around like FX, doing a lot of work around like currency conversions overall, currency settlements, cross-border stuff. This has been really, really, really interesting for me. Like, a lot of the companies that I've worked at have been primarily US based, or the division that I worked in was US based. So to really have this international piece of it has really ignited quite a new passion as far as the payments go. So I have to say, like, a lot of the payments is been a lot of fun. It's more like the fraud stuff, we've been solving pretty good with technology, and staying on top of that has been fun, but it's not as challenging as it was in the past, because now we finally have software that's smart enough to help us stay ahead of the curve for the most part. But I have also been super interested, and I'm trying to find the way to break into it the right way, because it is a full-time gig, but head more into like the full-on security side. So ATOs is usually where the fraud teams start to dip their toes into the security side, and now doing things like account create prevention based on like criteria around what the overall session that's trying to create it. But I think the full blown infosec stuff is super interesting to me too. I'm just not there yet.
So I'm glad you actually mentioned that, because I believe that in order to be able to handle fraud successfully, you have to look at that end-to-end transaction life cycle, or I always talk about customer journey. You
Yeah,
have to be able to have a holistic approach to everything. So everything I always say, from the moment customer touches your site until the moment customer calls in and says, I didn't get it, or the customer service or whoever processes that refund request and did not receive request. So I think you have to look at the entire picture to
yeah.
be able to know exactly where your risk is, and to be able to take this more proactive approach. Otherwise, you will always miss something. And I think one good thing you said is you're exploring something else, because credit card fraud or traditional fraud is handled much better with technology
Yeah,
right now. And I think we are a type of people that do not like to be bored. And
that's
if
exactly right.
machine learning is handling credit card, okay, what else is out there that I can handle? And that's exactly how I went into account takeovers or account security and policy abuse and refund fraud, because I was constantly looking for, is there something else there that I may have been missing? And I
I
have
think
found quite a few things.
Yeah, and I think that as we take away the monetization that's available for fraudsters on to do credit card fraud and carding against our sites, uh, that doesn't mean they're necessarily going to go away. Like, granted, we want them to go away, but that doesn't mean they're going to not look for other ways to monetize your site. And that's where we come into like this abuse prevention stuff. Is like if you have rewards programs or you have gift cards, there's going to be ways that people try to abuse your site. If you have like any sort of way that you can do any sort of monetization that
Yeah.
isn't just transactional, there's probably going to be a way that somebody can monetize it. But people need to remember that they also have data. They also have customer data that's valuable somewhere. If you have stored credentials, COF, you're going to have people that might be interested in gaining that. So that's where it comes into the security thing. It's just because you solve transactional fraud doesn't necessarily mean you mitigated risk
You're
on your website.
safe. Yes.
Yeah, like and
Yes.
I think like bot prevention. Papa Elon has very much brought bots to the regular people out there. But those are things that we've been working on for a long time. And you have companies like Perimeter X and Human. Well, now they're the same thing, trying to
Yeah.
solve that. Always have your CDNs. Have always been trying to solve bot stuff. But I think as like the bots are a problem that people don't necessarily realize. And we don't just mean bots that are scripting your site and buying things, but bots that are trying to do DDoS attacks against you, trying to penetrate accounts, do brute force logins. These are
Yeah.
things that I think that other as the monetization on the fraud side goes away, there's still risk there for monetization of your data elsewhere. So
Oh, absolutely. Bots that are creating accounts, I think that's always something that's being missed. And if you have any rewards, any welcome rewards or birthday code or
yep,
any type of promotion or any type of gift at the opening account, you certainly have bots opening these accounts and opening it
yep,
at high level. So definitely there is a lot of risk out there. And I think that's probably what keeps us going.
I
Just
think
being
so.
able to
There's
look
always
into these
something.
other I always say fraud is like a balloon. Once you squeeze it on one end, another end will pop up. There's going to be something that will not go away. They may stay quiet a little bit and move on to the different company and exploit that, but eventually they will be coming back. So it's best to be ready. So I know what you like, or we know a little bit what you like about company. What is it that you would like to change about the industry, not company? Sorry.
Yeah, the industry. I think the industry
What
overall
is
is
it
headed.
missing? What do you think
Yeah.
it's missing?
Oh, I mean, I think it's headed in a positive direction. I think the MRC is doing some great things around certifications because, like, we've only really had the CFE for a really long time, and I think that with the MRC trying to do an actual certification program that's going to be like an alternative to that, it's going to really help with like there's education directly in our field. We never had education directly in our field before. Now, a lot of us have done panels and can contribute to the education of our peers. You and I have been on several panels, so we contribute to that education, but putting some framework around that will be really cool. So because sometimes on the panels, you don't really always know like what is actually going to come out at the end, and what's been truthful and what's not been. Like I've been very much to panels even very recently that didn't have any sort of checking of the data, and there's very much in a main session on a keynote, there was some wrong information that was supplied, and thankfully, most of the people in the audience were able to understand that that was bullshit, and that it was done. But yeah, I think, and you even mentioned on the last one that like you're working on your own training course too.
Yes.
So I think so you understand the education piece as well.
Yes, my training will more be around it's going to be more around understanding where the risk is and how to identify these risks in the entire life cycle of that transaction, and how to measure what you're supposed to measure, how to measure your approval rate, because it is kind of unfortunate that there are so many people out there that are fraud managers, but they've never been told how to truly measure this approval rate.
Yeah.
And or how to measure your chargeback rate. What are the other risks of second chargebacks or pre-arbitration, when you should go after it, when not, and how to kind of understand what are your risks and what you should truly be chasing after, instead of spending your time maybe just focusing on those chargebacks, which we always talk about.
Yeah.
How else you can kind of
A post chargeback world.
yeah, no more chargebacks, or yeah, not focusing so much more on chargebacks. So how did the industry change besides just certification? How do you think it changed in the last few years or in the last
I mean,
decade?
yeah, I would say, granted, a lot more people care about it and learn about it and talk
Oh,
about it.
absolutely.
I mean, then tons of money being thrown into it. Back when I started, there was only a few main companies. You had like your Certify, your Threat Metrics. iOvation was still a big thing, and Count. Those were the main ones. And then there was all sorts of little things that were like off to the side of it. You had Ethica was starting up at the time. Verify had been around for a little while, offering things that like step up products. White Pages Pro was very much in its infancy, and they've grown into their own monster. But now we have all these other new companies, that are solving with technology. I think like Sif Science kind of really ushered in that new technology level.
Mhm.
So a lot more people, like, I think that like there hadn't been a lot of focus on fraud. Like, not like every company didn't have a fraud person before, and now they do. Like you had some finance people or some customer service people that were working chargebacks, these costs of doing business, as we always say. But now every company has like dedicated people and staff to doing these things, and everybody has a tool.
And now that you mentioned some of these vendors, I don't think it's so much case right now, but several years ago, maybe 3 years ago, I started to feel that industry or the space is getting a little bit oversaturated with a
Yes,
bunch of these
everybody
solutions.
had
And
the same idea at once, it seemed like.
yes, yes, yes. And everybody had the same story and kind of same sales pitch. And it became really exhausting to kind of go
So
through all of these to find them. So how do you feel about that right now?
yeah,
I think it's getting better, but there
it
is a
is. So
there
I
is a
mean,
risk of that stuff to that as well. But we
there's
can talk
well,
about
yeah,
it.
NSA. There's consolidation, that happened that I think was necessary, but I also think was scary at the same time.
Exactly.
The So what I usually do is, especially if I've joined a new company, and they're like wanting an evaluation of their fraud tools, or if I do ever do any consulting and they want a overview of the market, I usually lump the products and the vendors that are currently in the space into categories. So there are three specific categories. There's like your full managed
Mhm.
solution, where you have to have a full-time person doing it, writing rules. Like, you don't just, there's no set it and forget it. This ain't Ronco. You got to be in the tool every day, writing your rules, looking at your orders, and making it work. And then there's the semi-automated solutions, which kind of do most of the heavy lifting for you, but you can put business logic over the top of it. And that's like, you know, I'm trying to find a way to put it, but there's you can kind of guide it. So I think Sif Science is a really good example of that, where like they give you a score based on their own machine learning, but then you can put your own parameters to have the item actually, the transaction actually live and breathe within. So you can set, quantity limits and velocity limits based on what you want, and all those
So
sorts of things
add
maintain
business
this.
rules,
Yeah,
leverage
on top
machine
of it.
learning, and also have business rules in
Yeah,
there. Yeah.
and then there's like your riskifieds, your signifieds, and your forwarders, where it's a hands-off solution. Like, it's just going to do what it does, and you can put your own business logic in, and you can ask them to whitelist or negative list things, but there are consequences of that if you do that. And inside, kind of in that same area, there's the other tools, the identity verification tools, the chargeback answering tools, so I guess there's kind of like a fourth bucket, but those aren't really fraud tools.
Yeah.
So when you really put all these pieces into like their boxes, you kind of get an idea of the landscape. But I will say there's getting to be less and less boxes. You had companies like NS8, which was just trying to be a big scam and money grab. that kind of is kicked out of there. If you have a lot of consolidation where companies are getting bought and putting them in, like you'll see like Simility was a tool, and then PayPal Braintree bought them and then integrated them into their own services. So it's not really a standalone tool anymore. It's kind of just not a thing. But you have all of these consolidation that's happening where the big players like the micro the not Microsoft, the Mastercards and the Visas started buying up their tools.
Yeah.
Equifax, buying Count. So all
But
these
there is a
big
danger with
players
that
came in.
too. I,
There is
I
like
think there's a danger, is there going to be enough competition between them to invest and
yeah.
improve these services?
Well, I think like you'll see companies like Visa right now starting to not necessarily but necessarily mandate use of these products that they've purchased,
Yeah,
which could
that's
be
true.
that could be scary. Like if they bought something that I didn't necessarily think was the right fit for me, but now they're mandating it. I don't really see how that could benefit me. I'd like to, like, I always say, I want the menu approach. I'd like to be able to see all of my offerings, but I'd like to be able to pick what I want to eat from the restaurant, So,
So just back to the categories, and I think that's something that I will definitely address in my training, and I wanted to share that. I also noticed a lot of fraud professionals do not really have full understanding of what
oh,
type of
yes.
service some of these vendors are providing. So I have different categories. I mean, I understand yours, but I have like identity authentication or verification category, actual fraud screening category, and alerting category. And
Okay.
then you have chargebacks, which is the fourth one.
Yeah,
So I
which,
think every time you do this service evaluation, you have to kind of understand what um, group, what category does it fit into? And that's not to say that your identity authentication vendor cannot help you manage fraud and screen fraud. It can, but it's not specifically
it's,
doing that. It's
yeah,
doing
that's not what
identity.
its original purpose was meant for. And you see, like, I think, like, there's certain tools that are getting close to having that. Like, they come with a score and everything. So if that was all you could afford, I guess you could kind of use it like that. But I
Yeah.
think that some of the cost on some of those can be higher. Um, yeah.
So I think there should be a little bit more talk around, not maybe today, not between you and I, but there should be a little bit more information around where these companies, what type of category these companies fall into, and what they can help you resolve. You could probably use it in some other ways and it can help you with some other risk management pieces, but identity solution is doing exactly that, is authenticating or verifying, validating that identity. It's not screening for credit card fraud.
Yeah, and I
um
think you miss a lot on the behavioral piece too if you only have this one piece. That's why if you step back and you look at like a holistic like transaction, then you get a clearer picture of what it is. If you just look at one tiny piece and you focus on one tiny piece, you might be missing something. You might wind up with more false positives or false negatives even. So
this I know that's also interesting that for example, Ethica, you mentioned Ethica. I've been using Ethica forever, even in my previous companies, but I hardly ever use it as a alerting system because my fraud screening vendor does a great job. I really don't have that many alerts that is
yeah.
helping me, and because we're fully automated, by the time I get it, it's usually gone. But it helped me numerous times identify some potential fraud rings, or it gives me new trends that I identify by just looking the time of
Yeah.
receiving these alerts, the amount, some trends and patterns within them that help me identify some new fraud rings, some new fraud trends. So, it wasn't intended to identify new trend, but it definitely
Well, I
helps with
mean,
it.
I
So,
think that it definitely for them specifically, and I think even Verify does it too. For people that don't really read their TC40 data, if they're leveraging 3D Secure, like people that don't properly ingest it or people that don't just look at it, like there's a lot of people that don't. There's a lot of people that don't even know what TC40 and safe data is. But using a tool like Ethica, you could still see those alerts coming in, even if you don't have like a financial liability for it. You can still see them happening, and that
yeah.
might be trends that you were missing because we're just letting 3D Secure. You're hoping you're blissfully ignorant of what was actually happening because you're letting your financial liability be moved. And I think
Yeah.
that look, those alerts definitely did that. I mean, I know a lot of companies that like have no idea what they have 3D Secure on, and they have no idea what do you mean? Like I could see what's actually being claimed. I don't have to pay for it, so what does it matter? It still matters. Like your
Because
merchant
you're
account is
thinking,
still on the hook. Even if you don't have to pay the dollars for it, you're still on the hook for compliance. And I
yeah.
think a lot of people forget that.
We do get alerts, and we do get some great information from there, but most of the time effort screening vendor is already declining it because we are fully automated. It's really decision was made right then and there. So customer maybe sees the authorization and calls and files the claim. We get the alert, but it's already declined. However, it's still helping us determine some of these trends. It's helping us share information with our fraud vendors. So I think, like, I just wanted to say that some of these vendors can be very purpose for some other things and manage some other type of risk if you just know how to use it appropriately. So I know you and I talked about training, because there is a lot more training. There's a lot more information out there. There's much more visibility into fraud industry and what all fraud vendors can do. But I know we talked about job postings on fraud managers, on fraud positions, and I think it's a very interesting topic because I still don't think that there is enough understanding in an industry what a job entails and what should be required. So you want to share your thoughts about it?
Yeah. I mean, I think right now is a really interesting time because obviously there's a lot of layoffs happening, which is super sad. And I would say not a lot of fraud people seem to be getting layoffs, but there are a couple that I've seen out there. But I will say that the companies that are hiring people for fraud positions, especially high level positions like senior director level positions or director level positions or quote head of, don't necessarily have a clear idea. It appears to what they're looking for, because I know some companies that have had job postings open, very popular companies that had job postings open for 6, 8, 9 months, and they still haven't filled those. And I know personally people that have applied for those positions that were declined those positions, and I know 3 of them on one big one that's still up right now were beyond mega qualified, but that company just sent them the rejection email right away. And I was a little shocked by that because they're probably overqualified for what that job is, which leads me to think that a lot of these long time postings that are open for several months, especially in this economy, either don't pay enough, which could be the case, but probably is a lack of understanding of what they're really looking for. And when they see these resumes come in, they might have a little bit of confusion either at the recruiting level or at the hiring manager, but I would assume it's at the recruiting level because it's just not passing the screening there. Now, I don't know how everybody's system is. I use Workday. I've used Workday at the last several companies. So I can go in at any time myself personally and see any open position that's open under me. I can see the resumes that are coming in there. So I would typically go in and browse around a little bit and see what's in there. But if you're relying on your recruiting to do that fulfillment for you and pass you the resumes, if you don't have exactly if you're not very clear on your job posting of what you're really looking for, and you have just some wacky stuff that isn't really what the day-to-day job's going to be, like how many times have you ever been on an interview and what they have listed in the job rec is not really what they're going to have you doing. Like they like a senior level position, they're like you need to be fighting chargebacks all day, and it's like, are you sure? Because this is I know you got like 30 people doing chargebacks over there. So
but there's also an interesting thing. I saw a lot of job descriptions for fraud executives say PhD in mathematics or PhD in computer science. I'm like, I don't have PhD in mathematics. I mean, great, you can do all calculations and create some great programs. Yeah, but do you know what to do with them? If you don't have knowledge of fraud trends and fraud industry, you can be a super great PhD genius mathematician.
Yeah.
If you don't know what to do with those rules or anything else that you create, any statistics. So I had one of the interviews quite some time ago at the bank where I was asked for the knowledge of specific software. I said, I don't have knowledge of that software. Don't you have people that do that? I mean, I am not an analyst person. I don't know how to do some of these. I don't know how to do coding. I don't know how to create some of these reports. But hey, I know how to use them. I know how to read them. And I know how to use that information and prevent fraud from happening because I know how fraud looks like. And they did tell me, you can't go through like 30,000 data fields or data rows and determine where the fraud is. I said, yes, I can, because I know what I'm looking for. It's not like I'm going to be looking at every single piece of these 30,000 rows. Yeah. I know exactly what I'm looking for, and I know how fraud looks like. So it is interesting that I've seen job description that if I would do job scans, I wouldn't probably match 20% to any of those. And I've been doing this for 20 plus years.
Yeah, I always think it's funny too when I see like these companies that have these postings up for a really long time. like I even in the past of like one of them I had applied for, they turned me down, which I mean, no harm, no foul. Like I'm not saying I'm the greatest in the world, but I definitely was qualified for their position. Uh, so I was a little caught off guard, and this was like, don't everybody. I'm super happy at my company. This wasn't like anything that was because of this company. It was in the before times. So at this company though, like I was very clear in my interview. Like I got recruited. I heard like they were very nice to recruit me. Uh, and I was very clear, though, in that entire process, the things that I do and the things that I don't do. And they were very clear back with me about the expectations that they wanted. So they had a really, really, really good idea here of exactly what they wanted from the position. And it happened to be exactly what I do and what I wanted to do. Like I'm really into the strategy thing right now and looking at the long term. And they had a lot of buy-in on my ideas. So I think there was a really good fit there. But in the past, like I've just sent my resume off to one of these companies that I think they're posting up for damn near a year now. Probably it was right before I even started here, and they're still hiring. They still like people message me about interviewing there, and I warn them every single time that it's probably a waste of your time because they don't know what they're looking for.
So what do you think needs to happen for this to change?
I think that one of the things that will help is this education and certification pieces because then you'll be able to say what it has. But I think there needs to be an expectation for hiring managers that are not in our industry of what our industry does. Like there needs to be some sort of framework like put out to like these glass doors or these indeeds about what fraud people actually do. And you don't need a master's in statistics because first of all it's super expensive unless you're actually literally being a data scientist. Like you don't need that for a manager role. Like if you're hiring like a director level or above position for a fraud team, like you should have underneath that person or adjacent to that person a product person that's going to help them build it, that's going to work with those individual developers over on the other side, on the engineering side. You should have people that are running your fraud and your chargebacks teams that have a pretty good idea, supervisor manager roles. Like the director level and above position like shouldn't exist if you want someone to be in the tool, writing rules and responding to chargebacks because you're paying way too much for somebody to be doing that. If your company isn't big enough to have one of those people yet, then you don't need one. You can get a manager, you can get a supervisor, you can have regular people doing it. You don't have to have a director at every single company, but if you're going to have one, make sure that like you have the rest of the people underneath them to do it. And I think that it needs to come down to having a very specific set of framework that's like a general guideline of this is what a fraud person does, this is what a fraud manager does, this is what a fraud director does, boom 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 boom, and put them out everywhere so that when these recruiting agencies or these people that are trying to like find the buzzwords in their postings
Exactly.
get the right people and not stuff that just is like, oh yeah, I saw an engineering role that I put up the other day. It said you need a 15 years of SQL experience. Let's just throw that in there. Like, why wouldn't you need that? You must know Python in order to be able to do this. Like,
Yeah, I've seen
probably
those too.
don't, like, and I understand that
I
like coming
don't.
with Python knowledge would be helpful if you're doing any of this database stuff, but like it's not necessary. Like you should be able to find somebody at your company that does. Like I have a BI team here. I think any large company has a BI team.
Exactly.
If I ask them for business intelligence data, I'm going to get it.
Exactly. And that's what I think you need to find someone who knows fraud and who knows how to
That's
implement or understand the statistics and that data and make changes
and I
depending
think
on it
like
rather
there
than
it goes the whole other way is I think there's also people that are in this industry that have been in this industry for so long and they've been so comfortable that they haven't bothered to learn and adapt with the times. So there are people in this industry that have high titles but don't have the actual knowledge to do any of this. Like, yeah.
which leads me to on another point. I think there has to be kind of a set expectation where fraud sits within an organization. You can't just put fraud in, I don't know, customer service.
Yeah, I've seen it everywhere. Like right now, I I,
I've
I
seen it
sit I sit
everywhere,
under
yeah.
finance and treasury right now, which is I think is fine. But like even at Ticketmaster, I was under the commercial team. I've been under customer service at Fandango, so I've been everywhere. Usually, I wind up more in the finance team, but I will say that like you wind up with people that like that don't necessarily know. But I'm very fortunate at my last few companies that my bosses are be like they don't pretend to be an expert. They look at me and they say, "Hey, you're the expert. You can tell me what I need to be knowing and how I should be interpreting this." And that's when you
That's
get
very
like,
fortunate position to
yeah,
be in.
yeah. And I'm fortunate that I'm able to instill that trust in my decisions and my results
Absolutely.
with my management team, so they don't ever have to second guess me. They just trust me, and it's been successful. And I think that I'm very fortunate that I've been my last couple of companies specifically have been very empowering to me, and have just let me lead the way that I need to lead, you know. But at the same time, like I mean, coming back to that thing, like I still think that there's like I call them frauds in the fraud industry. But there are people that like pretend like they're experts,
Imposters.
and they tell everybody that they're experts. But when you really peel back the layers, like they'll be like, what's a chargeback, or what are payments? They have like no basic understanding of what how payments work and how it leads to chargeback, no basic understanding of the reason codes of chargebacks. They've just been in like these management positions for so long, and they've always had successful people underneath them that like when they change companies or they try to do something new, like they get overwhelmed with responsibility and actually having to do and having to have the knowledge. And it's interesting to see. I've only seen it happen a few times in this industry, but what's that old saying that like you get promoted to your level of incompetence, you know? And I think that that's true. Like I'm scared I'm eventually going to hit it myself. I don't claim to be the best, you know. I don't, even though my mugs say #1 fraud fighter. If anybody wants to go buy some merch,
Really?
that's funny because of my ego. You know what I mean? Because
Okay.
everybody always says I am arrogant and maybe, but I just thought it was funny to put it on the mug, you know, to
I
play into
always say
this.
you are like one of those younger brother that you have that you just sometimes want to slap and
Hey,
say, "Hey, stop
and
it now."
the industry always needs one, you know, and we always need
Agree.
a scapegoat, you know, and I'm happy to be that guy because you know, eventually I think that people do try useful nuggets from all of my overload of content that I put out there into the world.
Definitely unique and interesting.
Yeah. So I think that we got through most of our little notes here, and I think that that was a pretty dang good interview that you got there. Sorry everybody about being all about me and this being the Jordan episode, but you know that just happens sometimes. I hope that you guys didn't take it as seriously as because it's not meant to be a serious episode. It's meant to be more of a lighthearted, fun episode. Just so people could get to know me. You know, people listen to this, they really do. So I want people to know the man behind the mic. And Dajana, you always have been very good at interviewing me and asking me probing questions. So you did an excellent job today. So thank you very much for doing that.
So I think there were some interesting fraud related conversations here too that's hopefully listeners can take and maybe implement some changes on their end. And thank you
Yeah,
so much for having me. Definitely it's been a pleasure. I didn't know about giraffes. I knew about
I love me
guitars,
some
but didn't
giraffes.
know the level of your skills, I guess, as far as guitar playing. So it
Yeah,
was
I wouldn't
really
necessarily
learning
call them
experience for me.
skills, you know, but I definitely fake it till I make it, you know. But it's the sounds that are coming out are getting better, and they're getting
Okay,
pretty
that's good.
good. So
So you're going in the right direction.
yeah.
Well, thank you so much for having me. Absolutely,
Thanks
it's been a
thanks for
pleasure.
being a guest again, and we'll see you soon. Bye everybody.
Bye.